If I was to say to you that lots of the people who watch this show are major fans of horse racing, they love the sport, but one of the things they struggle with is the pro cush. They don't like seeing the pro cush being overused. They don't like seeing horses being whipped. And they have friends who have real concerns about it as well. What would you say to them?
I could understand in a way because in essence it just looks like people hitting animals. But I tried to explain that it's used for encouragement, and it's a stick wrapped in foam. It's more the noise it makes. It doesn't hurt the horses, and it's used sparingly for encouragement to get the best out of them. So just that would be my first approach.
But Martin, if that's true, if it's really just about encouragement, then why would the British Horse Racing Authority impose such severe limitations on using it and severe punishments for breaking those rules? If it's not a welfare issue, why would they do that?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I don't know. They just, the BHA just don't seem to have got this right, and they seem to be tying themselves in knots. If you remember back to a couple of years ago when they decided to tinker with the rules when they didn't need to be tinkered with, they came out with all kinds of crazy ideas. One of them where jockeys were only allowed to hit them in the backhand position. And it took myself and lots of other jockeys at the time to say, well, that's going to create a welfare issue because you'll end up hitting horses in the wrong place, which is harmful. So they went back on that, and then they came out with more rules. And I think, I can only agree with what you're saying, that they're making it look worse than it is. They're making the pro cush, they're making it seem like a bigger deal because they're handing out lengthy suspensions. So it makes it sound like, jockeys getting 28-day suspensions. That's a long time. They're making it sound like they've done something pretty horrific.
The BHA say that jockeys were consulted at every step of the whip consultation process. We will return to that in a second. But when the rules came out initially, there was going to be a change to the riding style. And when the jockeys got on the equicizer, they discovered very quickly this isn't going to work because you're now going to be hitting the horse with the pro cush in an area that would be a welfare issue. You'd basically be hitting the ribs. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And that proved the fact that they didn't consult with jockeys. They came up with these rules on their own, and they kept telling the media and the world that we've consulted with jockeys. They never. I mean, I was still riding at the time, and we were kept in the dark. And then when they came out with these rules, we had to point out that there's a flaw in that rule, and horses will end up because it's really difficult to hit a horse. So the idea is you hit a horse on its backside, on its rump, so you're hitting its, you're not causing any harm. But if you land short and you hit him between the backside and the ribs, that's where the internal organs are, and it's a very soft, fleshy area, and it's very dangerous to strike a horse. But that was what was happening, because jockeys couldn't turn the whip over into the forehand and able to reach back further and hit them in the correct place. So yeah, that was something that the BHA had to go back on, and I don't think they liked it. And then they came out with new rules of you can only hit the horse 6 times during the race, and then they decided to start disqualifying, which is why we're seeing what we did a couple of weeks ago at Newmarket.
If you were to hit me on the ass with a pro cush, it wouldn't hurt me. If you were to hit a racehorse on the rump with a pro cush, it also wouldn't hurt. It's a padded air cushion device. It was developed with input from the RSPCA, who up until recently conceded it wasn't a welfare issue. It's not a welfare breach, but the new rules would have been a breach of welfare. The reward for pointing this out wasn't for the British Horse Racing Authority to put their hands up and say, oh my goodness, we're so sorry. We've made such a huge mistake. We're so grateful that you fixed this for us. It was to give you a concession. And the concession was, we're not going to give you a restriction of 7 strikes of the whip on the flat, 8 over jumps. We're going to reduce that. You point out their blunder, and your reward is to be punished further for it.
Yeah, you're correct. It was almost like the BHA they hate rolling back on anything. And once jockeys pointed out that there was a flaw in their new rule and it was going to cause harm to horses, and it would become a welfare issue, they had to go back on that and change their rules. And then it was almost like, well, if we're going to do that, we need to take something off you. And they reduced the amount of times you could strike the horse with the pro cush and brought in heavier suspensions. So, the whole idea is we should be defending our sport in a way and be confident in the fact that these pro cushes don't hurt horses. They're there for encouragement, and jockeys are responsible enough to use them in that way. And the minute you put a number on something and then start reducing it and giving out very lengthy suspensions, it's an own goal, isn't it? You're just telling people who don't really know much about the sport. If somebody reads a article today and says, the jockey got 28-day suspension from race riding for going a few smacks over with the pro crush, they're going to think, God, he must have done something. That must be really bad. So it just sets a dangerous precedent, doesn't it? The minute you start putting a number on something and you just keep reducing it until the whip will be gone completely, I'd imagine.
Well, if I was a cynical person, I would say that's exactly what the goal of this is. They can't outright ban the pro cush, because if they do, it'll be like in Scandinavia when the jockeys went on strike. And also, owners aren't going to like that. Trainers aren't going to like it. And jockeys certainly won't like it. I think a lot of fans would be against it too. But if you can impose a set of restrictions that make the whip so unpalatable that the jockeys themselves are the ones who start saying, look, we're just better off not dealing with this, or the fans become so incensed by it and so fed up of it that they start going, and you know what, just get rid of it. It's not a welfare issue. This is what I find to be so confusing about the whole thing. Julie Harrington, she didn't do many media appearances because that's not what she does, but certainly at the Asian Gambling Conference when she gave her speech, she referenced that the closing stages of the Gold Cup will be shown on news programs across the UK and around the world. This is an opportunity to make the sport more aesthetically pleasing, to engage a new fan base and bring new people to racing. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially that's what she's saying. Now, when the BHA are accused of pandering to an audience that they'll never appease, they strongly reject that claim. How dare you suggest the BHA are pandering? They almost introduced a set of rules that would have actively worked against the welfare of horses, because it would have resulted in horses being hit in the wrong place, which would have been a breach of welfare. They are highlighting the pro cush and excessive use of the pro cush, making out it's a welfare issue when, up until very recently, the RSPCA, who were involved in the development of the pro cush, conceded it wasn't a welfare issue. And it actively works against the integrity of the sport, because where's the integrity in a jockey who breaks the rules of racing being disqualified from a race from first place, but the winnings have already been paid out on that horse, and the punters who backed the rightful winner, well, they can go pound sand.
It's almost like if you want to completely ruin something, take these steps, and it's almost like that seems to be what they've done. The one thing I don't get, in terms of, they decided they're going to start disqualifications if you use the whip over 10 times or more, so 4 times over the permitted level. So that's what we did see a couple of weeks ago on Cesarewicz. So they decided to bring that rule in, disqualification. Okay, fair enough. But why could they not do it on the day, disqualify the horse on the day, have an inquiry? Because they do it with interference inquiries. Why can't they do it on the day and deal with it, and then you're not left with this embarrassment of a horse owners going and collecting a trophy, people being paid out on this horse winning, but we all know it's going to get thrown out in 2 days' time. It's just ridiculous, and it just puts the sport in a bad light, doesn't it? But I was interested that Brant Dunshay was interviewed on ITV Racing the other day, and he never once answered the question, why did you decide to go down this route of not declaring the horse disqualified on a day? There was no reason behind it, or it's never explained why they decided to do this. So that none of it makes sense. But the BHA have never said, we have decided to do it this way for this reason. So it's just shambolic, isn't it?
It seems to me like he's rehearsed a lot of buzzwords and talking points, and he's just very keen to get those out there. I did think it was very interesting that he wanted to throw ITV under the bus, because the narrative surrounding this, for those of us who are willing to talk about it, who were involved in the decision-making process to make this happen, to not disqualify racehorse in the day, so that the punters who've backed the rightful winner are paid out properly. And he blamed ITV. Said it in so many words, we consulted your colleagues on this, is what he said to Ollie Bell. The suggestion has always been that it was the bookmakers who wanted this, but actually, if you think about it, a lengthy stewards inquiry would go against ITV's interests, because it's going to affect their precious broadcast schedule. And never mind the fact that there are punters who've backed the rightful winner and are going to miss out on their payment. Bookmakers obviously want to pay out as quickly as possible. There's a bigger point, though. Why are people overcomplicating this? Interference rules are far more complex. You have to interview each jockey. You have to get their testimony as to what happened in the race. You have to interpret the rules as they're written. You have to see whether or not a horse actually caused interference. The whip rules only apply to the horse who won the race and the second. First thing you do is count how many strikes of the whip was used the winner. If it was 10, that's an automatic disqualification. There's no interpretation of the rules. That's the set rule. That horse is disqualified. Now, did the second horse get hit 10 times? No? Well, then they're the winner. That's it. So actually, it's much easier to sort out the whip rules on the day and far more complicated to sort out interference rules. So why is it being made out that it's this incredibly complex thing that couldn't possibly be done on race day?
That's exactly the case. I mean, I've rode for nearly 30 years now. I was involved in inquiries, and when it comes to interference, it's open for interpretation. If I've ridden in a race and I've bumped someone and won, and that horse finished, I'll go in and try and exaggerate what happened in my defence, and and he will do the same, try and win the race, the other jockey, and that can take a long time. But at the end of the day, the stewards hold an inquiry and then they make a decision whether the result stands or they turn it around, and they take the time, they do it, and they announce it, and then bets are paid out after that. So like you say, it's only counting from 1 to 10. And if Dave can see that jockeys used the whip 10 times, then why can't they disqualify on the day? And it can't, like you say, it can't be any longer process than what would happen with interference rules. It just doesn't make sense. And nobody's explained, oh, this is why we want to do it this way, or this. I mean, I said this from day one. I said it was a bad idea. I was working on course when Jim Crowley won the King George on Hookham, and everyone was saying in the press, oh, we've got to count how many times he used his whip, and he used his whip 9 times. So one more, he would have been disqualified, and he very nearly did it. I remember saying then, I was working, and I said, well, look, this is going to be an embarrassment. You know, you've got owners collecting trophies. Sheikh Hissa, who'd taken over from her father's racing empire, Sheikh Hamdan, and she was there. She was delighted. It was a big winner, and I'm like, that would be embarrassing if she collects the trophy and then she's told, oh, by the way, you're going to lose this race in a couple of days' time. And then you've got the other issue of people having a bet on a horse, and then it's, that if your horse finishes second, but within the rules, you know that the horse that's beat you is going to get thrown out. But it's no good to you. You're not going to get paid on it. And by their own rules, the BHA rules, they consider if you use the Pro Cush 10 times, you've effectively cheated to win that race, so you're going to be disqualified. So why can't you just do it on the day? It doesn't make sense, does it?
There's no common sense to it, but that's the problem with common sense. It's not that common, certainly not amongst the BHA. I did find it interesting that Nick Luck, who I think is too good to just make a throwaway comment, he's the best broadcaster this sport has by far. Maybe I'm overreading this, but I thought he was putting something down to see would anybody pick it up. He was suggesting that one of the reasons for this is Whirlpool, or at least the international betting markets, that if the BHA were to say, we're going to reject winners on the day for breach of overuse of the whip, that the international markets would see British racing as less attractive, and certainly that Whirlpool might very well take the attitude, well, we're not waiting for 20 minutes to pay people out, and there's no first past the post with Whirlpool. If he's right about that, it's pretty dangerous that this sport is now being run for the benefit of the international market and not for the British punter. If you're doing something that actively hurts the British punter, and the Irish punter for that matter, that's also highly questionable too. You said earlier on about Branton Sheehan. I do find it odd that he's giving quotes to the Racing Post saying this is an egregious overuse of the whip from Jamie Powell, a flagrant misuse of the Pro Cush because he hit the horse 10 times. But if somebody hits the horse 6 times in a race, that's perfectly fine. What is the difference between 4 strikes? If a jockey was to hit a horse 10 times, once each furlong in a 10 furlong race, is that a more troubling use of the Pro Cush than a jockey who uses it 6 times in the final furlong?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't know. I don't know what the BHA is thinking. Like I said, there's got to be, you've got to have rules. Rules have been in place as long as I was riding. You can't go out and overuse the Pro Cush. I mean, it looks bad. We know it doesn't hurt the horses, but it does look bad, and you've got to have rules in place. But yeah, it's like you say. I just think the BHA did come out with things to suit them at the time, but it's just. Going back to what you said about the Whirlpool betting and stuff, I mean, listen, clever people than me can sort all that out. But you're right. If we are now running our racing to please people on the other side of the world to get more revenue from Whirlpool, and we're actually framing our rules around that, then it's just ridiculous, isn't it? I don't know whether it's true. I had heard that being said. The reason they won't disqualify on the day is because of Whirlpool. And like you say, all it's going to do is drive punters in this country away from our sport and not have a bet on racing. And we need to realise we need betting, it's a big part of racing, and people go for a day out and go racing and have the few quid, on horses, and then people who backed the horse that was second on the day at Newmarket on course, and they, what must they be thinking? Let's just say somebody turns up and he has 20 quid on the horse. What's it called? Manxman, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And they watch him run a brilliant race, just get beat a short head, and they go, "Oh well, I've lost me 20 quid." And they go, "Well, in actual fact, the winner's going to get disqualified because he cheated to win." And they go, "Well, it's just going to stop people going racing and betting. Simple." So it might increase. It might be keeping people happy the other side of the world, but we're going to lose our racing fans here. They're going to become disillusioned with it. It just doesn't make sense. And even if that is the case, it's all, well, people don't want to wait and whatever. Let's look at the QE2 Stakes on Saturday. Great race. Sharon won. Sylvester drifted off the rail, bumped Factor Cheval a couple of times. He didn't pull his whip through. Ruby Walsh analysed it on Racing TV and said he's made a mistake there, and he bumped Factor Cheval a couple of times. Factor Cheval got tired and dropped away, and he beat him half a length on some. But if that would have come close, there would have been an inquiry over that, and that might have taken 20 minutes, and they might have had to reverse the placings. But that's just part and parcel of racing, isn't it? So why they can't just do the same with breaches of the rule for the whip is beyond me. I'd like the BHA to come out and say, if it is because of Whirlpool, why don't you come out and say it? Be honest and talk about it.
But Martin, if you and I are covering an American race, we don't cover American racing for TalkSport, but let's just say we were, and you and I both placed a bet on a horse, there's interference, and the American stewards decide sufficient interference has been caused here to disqualify that racehorse because their rules are much stricter than ours. We don't get paid. If the horse loses because the stewards have disqualified, that's it. You have to accept those rules. There's Whirlpool betting on America. Disqualification happens there quite a bit, actually. I know it was an Arabian Thoroughbred race, but it doesn't change the fact that it was a race in France, in Saint-Cloud, where within 10 minutes they had disqualified a rider for using the whip 10 times. They have no problem taking betting in France. They have no problem with the fact that horses are disqualified on the day for excessive breaches of whip rules there. There's some narrative that, no, that can't happen here. I don't believe it. I think that people are just seeing through this. They're very tired. They're not just tired of the whip rules and the narrative surrounding it. They're very tired of being gaslit. 130 jockeys were represented by a submission by the PJA to the BHA to be part of the whip consultation before. Do you remember that?
Yeah, vaguely, yeah.
It was 130 or 150.
Yeah.
Jockeys were reaching out to me at the time to say that can't be true because there's only one document that we all signed. And it was sent in all about the previous rules and how the previous rules were effective, were fair, and that they were working. And there's a section from that document that I think is very important to mention. The problem, if there is one, isn't that the penalties are not a sufficient deterrent or punishment, and the evidence is completely to the contrary. There were 7,874 races run in 2020 and 73,843 runners. Yet just 297 instances where a jockey was found in breach of the whip rules. This is an offending rate of just 3.77% of races, i.e. almost 97% of races have no whip breaches, or just 0.4% of rides. Given that all recorded offences will be by the jockey who rode the winner of the race and the BHA does not provide those figures for consultation, it's safe to say that at least 98% of all winners are ridden by a jockey who has not broken the whip rules. That flies in the face of any suggestion that the current penalty structure is not a sufficient deterrent, especially when factoring in that over 68% of whip breaches were for one over the permitted level. Anyone who has ridden a horse at racing pace in a packed field in front of a crowd will know it's not easy to be certain of how many times or how often you've used your whip or crop given the speed, danger, adrenaline and other psychological factors. So 98% of the riders in the United Kingdom were not in breach of the rules as they were previously. Yet Brant Dunshee wants to go on ITV and flex and brag about the fact that 60% of the jockeys have adhered to the new rules, openly stating 40% of them have broken them. That's not something to be bragging about.
Exactly, yeah. It was. I thought it was a bizarre interview. Going back to that, it just reminded me of watching these politicians being questioned the last few weeks. I was waiting for them to bring up the 22 billion black hole, maybe blame that for the whip issue. It was just, But look, I don't ride anymore. This doesn't affect me, but obviously I still work in the industry. But when I was riding, and during the the issues when he first brought in these rules. You just get so used to the BHA saying one thing and you know it not to be true. You just get used to it. The whip consultation it was just one big lie. There was 2 jockeys were involved, and they were told they couldn't talk to the other jockeys about what was happening, and that's fact. And there was this tells you how bad the BHA were at the time when they were bringing these rules in, and we spoke about not being able to hit the horse in the correct place because the backhand, forehand, and we were told, or I was told, well, we're going to allow flat jockeys to use jump jockeys whips, the Pro Cush. That was their answer. He said because they're longer, and so I checked it out, and in fact, they're exactly the same size. So you can only buy, as a jockey, you can only buy a Pro Cush that has been sanctioned by the BHA. So they have like a chip in them, which is rightly so. You can't just and they're all exactly the same length, whether in a jump jockey whip or a flat jockey whip. So that just shows.
So these are the people who are constructing the rules, and they're looking at you with a straight face and saying, "Oh, well, you can just use the jump jockey's Pro Cush. That's longer," and it isn't.
Yeah, it isn't. So at the time when I was riding, one of the valets would he actually it's Ryan Moore's auntie has a tack shop, and she provides a lot of the jockeys with their equipment. And like I said, these need to be proper BHA sanctioned Pro Cush, and she provided them, and they were all the same size, all of them.
There's a segment of the whip consultation report that the BHA published. By the way, the whip consultation report was published 7 months after the jockeys submitted this document. This is the only document that 130 or 150 jockeys were part of submitting to the BHA. This, by the way, was weaponized by the British Horse Racing Authority, and it was then uncritically parroted by one of the leading pundits on ITV, which I know was infuriating. I won't say who, but to leading jumps jockeys in the UK. They were furious that was never corrected. It was never an apology that actually we misquoted that. And this is very damaging because it leads to a perception that, it's the jockey's fault. And this was the point that pundit was making. Oh, the jockeys shouldn't have agreed. There's 130 of them shouldn't have agreed to these rules if they weren't going to be able to adhere to them. But they weren't. They knew nothing about what the rules were going to be. So the document they sent in was 7 months before the whip consultation report was published, which would be 8 months before the rules were published. So they didn't know. You made reference to the fact that there were only 2 jockeys who actually did know what was going on. That was Tom Scudamore and PJ McDonald. I have no problem with them whatsoever. I think they're both great professionals. One of them resigned from their position. The other's retired. I feel like they were really taken advantage of in this situation, and they were told you have to adhere to the confidentiality process. The organization I would have a real issue with is the PJA. They should have been out there fighting for you, because I remember talking to you when you got the rules. You were shocked, and we had to contact the British Horse Racing Authority for comment from them. They said you were all given advance notice of the rules. I think getting an email an hour before, we'll say allegedly, an hour before the rules are published in the Racing Post, who had been given the rules that morning because they had to do their editorial, that's kind of outrageous, but that's technically they're able to say, no, we gave them advance warning. And when they say, oh, jockeys were consulted at every step of the whip consultation process, technically speaking, that's true, but it's very disingenuous. It was just those 2 jockeys. They were not allowed to share the process of what was going on because they had to adhere to the confidentiality of the agreement. There was no NDA, but the PGA told you there was.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the case. Yeah, I called Dale Gibson and said, how could you let this happen? Why? These 2 jockeys were supposed to be representing the whole jockey population as a body, and didn't tell us anything about what you've agreed to or what they were planning on bringing in. He said, well, Dale Gibson told me that they were subjected to a non-disclosure agreement. And I went bananas. I'm like, how can you sign something like that? And he said, oh, and then I asked to see it and the paper he'd signed. And then he told me that it was a verbal agreement. And then it went on. And then Dale denied that he ever said that to me. And PJ McDonald, I spoke to him and he said, oh, I can't believe we've been hoodwinked in a way. He said we were told we couldn't speak to the other jockeys about what was being spoken about in the weeks leading up to the rules being announced. So yeah, it was just, that was just part of the problem. That was the start of it, and that's how that rule came in. And then they had to backtrack on it because they realised that they should have probably consulted with us. We'd have told them before they brought the rule in that you're going to end up hitting horses in the wrong place. So that was just part of the rule. But that's where we are now, and it just does seem to be the same. The same thing, isn't it? The BHA just don't speak plainly, and everything is just smoke and mirrors. That's how it seems to be.
In the whip consultation report, because I'm such a nerd, I actually read it, Martin. And this is from memory, but there's a line in there about how in the BHA's charter they're not allowed to refer to something by its brand name. So Julie Harrington, Brandon Sheet, they can't come out and say we've bought the stewards new iPhones. They'd have to say we've bought them smartphones. And they make reference to the fact that calling the whip the Pro Cush would be more preferable and would be better for the general public, but that it's not allowed in their charter to do that. Now, that was 2 years ago. Julie Harrington is paid £370,000 plus per year, not including bonuses and not including her pension. Have they changed the guidelines? Have they changed the charter so that they can now start referring to it as the Pro Cush and instruct all of the media to not call it the whip? Don't call it the whip, call it the Pro Cush, because that's what it is. It's not a welfare issue. Have they done that?
That's a good question. I don't know.
They obviously haven't. They make reference to it in the whip consultation report, but then take no action on it, which just seems to be what the BHA is very good at. The other thing is they were talking about public perception, and they based a lot of the decision-making process on a series of surveys they did. Matt Chapman was making reference to this on ITV. They do a lot of surveys. They base a lot of the decision-making process on surveys, but they're not really willing to share that data with us. Matt was very, very good in trying to extract data that Josh Apiafi mentioned on this show back in January. I don't know how Josh has access to that data, but everything Josh said in that podcast has come to be true. By the way, in the days after that podcast went live, Josh was contacted by the biggest people in British racing. So they all listened to that episode, which means they all listen to this show. So they're very aware of the conversation we're having, and I think it needs to be had. I want to be talking about how great Champions Day was. I want to get Martin's perspective on Kyprios. This is a serious issue. The sport is in big trouble. And it seems to me it's the lack of leadership is the problem. So these things need to be talked about. But the data that was used in that whip consultation report was about public perception. Now, they based it off of, it was either 1,117 or 1,119. I think it was 1,119 people they interviewed. Trish, can you just do the percentages on this? Because I'm not very good at this kind of stuff. It was 55% of people opposed the whip. What does that work out at? And then 12% of 55%, please, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. So 1,119 people in a country that has over 60 million people is kind of wild, but okay, that's what you want to go with. Thank you. 55% of people oppose the use of the whip. That's 615 of them. When they explain to those 615 people, this is actually how the whip is used. It's not a Pro Cush. It's not a welfare issue. It's a Pro Cush, blah, 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 blah. 12% of them changed their minds, which is 73 people. Now, there's a problem with that, Martin. That means there's only 73 reasonable people out of the 615 who actually wanted to engage in the conversation and learn. The others, they're unreasonable. They have their perception, they have their opinion, and they don't care about the facts. They didn't matter to them. I don't like racing. I don't like the whip. I want it banned. It doesn't matter to me what you say about it. I want it gone because I don't like it. Well, that's not... Why would you base any decision-making process on the opinions of people who are unreasonable and don't actually want to hear from the public, don't want to hear from the BHA that, no, this is not a welfare issue, here's why. Why are you trying to pander to an audience that has no interest in being appeased?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, does it? Because, you're never going to change these people's minds, unfortunately. So I think, we need to concentrate more on keeping the people who love the sport and come racing and have a bet and watch the sport. I think we need to just concentrate harder on keeping people and not driving more people away, which is what these rules seem to be doing. like I said earlier, I've no doubt there's people would have gone racing at Newmarket at Cesarowicz's day and may have had a bad experience and say, well, that's, I'm not going to bother going racing again, or having a bet on horse racing. If you can have a bet on a horse that the horse cheats to win and you still don't get paid out, it's incredible. There are people in this country who will always dislike racing and want it banned. I mean, I've heard it said, I can't remember what I watched, it was a debate, and somebody said, well, we ban racing tomorrow, what do we do with all the racehorses? And the reply was, we'll just let them live in the wild. So you let a couple of thousand horses just roam the streets, or open all the stable doors in Newmarket and just let them all gallop out and go and live happily ever after in the wild. That's what some people believe. So you're never going to change these people's minds.
Yeah, it would be the biggest equine crisis since World War II. You would just have horses abandoned in fields, they would die off. That's actually one of the things I debated the head of PETA on Talk TV, Talk Radio. And at the very end of the interview, I got her to admit that they want the breeding of racehorses to be banned. And I jumped on that and said, so what you really want is the extinction of the thoroughbred breed, a breed that has been cultivated over hundreds of years, horses that are loved, cared for. I'm not telling you that there are not horses that are abused. Of course there are. There are humans who are abused. There are children who are abused. We're a very imperfect species, but the racehorse only exists because of the racehorse industry, and the racehorse industry only exists because we have racehorses. They're dependent on one another, and yes, horses die on the races, on racecourses. It's horrific when that happens, but they don't exist without the sport. In the same way that the people who want us all to become vegan, well, then you don't need cows anymore. And they're not just going to live freely roaming around in fields. They'll be slaughtered by wild animals who will kill them. And that's what will happen to the thoroughbred breed. And these people justify this. They say things like, well, horses have got physical deficiencies and they've got breathing issues and they need breathing operations and all kinds of different problems. And they'll still be wild horses. This is the kind of stuff they say. There are people, as you said, there are people who disagree with you. That's okay. I really don't understand what the obsession is with the BHA in trying to appease an audience that are never going to like this sport. If I was generous, I could say that 2 years ago when Animal Rising protested the Grand National, there were 500 people there protesting it. There weren't. It was more like 300. Was it even that? It might have been just over 200, actually. That was a sold-out meeting. There were 7.5 million people watching it on ITV. There was 600 million people watching it around the world. Who knows how many betting on it? The Derby later that year was a packed crowd, a really packed crowd. There were about 80 people protesting it. Millions of people tuning in to watch it. There are far more people who love horse racing than despise it. There are far more people who are engaged in this sport and love it and are fans of it than who dislike it. Why are you not just trying to cater to the fans who appreciate it, who love it? It's the second most attended outdoor sport in the UK. It's either the fifth or the sixth most watched sport in the United Kingdom. Why are you trying to make decisions based on perceptions that are completely against the sport? Why are you imposing rules that make out there's a serious welfare breach when there isn't, and that actively work against the integrity of racing because people who back a horse that's going to be disqualified are winning, and the people who back the loser are losing. The people who back the rightful winner have lost. Not just missed out on the winnings, they've lost their bet. There's no logic to it.
It doesn't make sense. I think, listen, we could sit here all day talk about this whip issue, but nothing makes sense. And I personally believe where the BHA let themselves down is they can't ever say, do you know what, I think we might have got that wrong. Let's sit around the table and let's discuss it. Let's get the people who are involved and let's discuss it and see if we can come up with a better solution. They just don't seem to be able to do that. It's just impossible. And then, watching that interview with Brandt was just embarrassing. I mean, even to the point where he threw Jim Crowley's name in because Jim had an idea of redesigning the Pro Cushion, doing something different. And Brandt claimed on ITV that he was working closely with Jim. And I messaged Jim Crowley about 5 minutes after that. and said, "Oh, I said you're to blame," joking. And I sent him the clip of I recorded on my phone, sent it to him. I said, "It's all your fault," just joking with Jim. And he sent back, "It's a load of rubbish. They're not interested in what I have to say about it." So he claimed that that wasn't true. Branton,
sorry, hold on a second. He specifically, Matt Chapman was pressing Branton Shee, essentially putting the pressure on the British Horse Racing Authority. What are you doing about this? You're punishing jockeys. 10 years worth of bans have been dished out to jockeys for rules where only 3.77% of races, 7,874 races run in 2020, only 3.77% of them had a whip bridge. Now, 10 years of bans have been handed out to jockeys. Jockeys' mental health, we're told their BHA are so concerned about jockeys' welfare. That's why they banned the saunas. And they're so concerned about their mental health. That's why they're actively impeding their ability to go and do their job correctly. And to get out of that, he's saying we're working closely with one of the best jockeys in Britain to develop a new whip that's even friendlier, a feather duster type. And you're saying that's a lie.
Well, I can only tell you what Jim told me, and I messaged Jim like I do a lot, speak to him a lot because he's a friend, and I just messaged him and said, I just listened to it, and I said, "It's your fault," or "What's happening," blah, blah, blah. And he said, "That's a load of rubbish. They don't, the BHA, I've got it on my phone, he messaged me, he said they're not interested. They haven't spoke to him about it properly." He said, I can't remember the words he used, but something like they're not interested or they just don't want to hear it. So, yeah, something not right somewhere, is there? That was Jim's response. Can't imagine he's just lied. He didn't say to me, "Yeah, I'm working very closely with them and hopefully this looks like a good idea." He just, in 2 lines on a WhatsApp message, he told me that's a load of rubbish.
I'm going to say this. I do not doubt your integrity for a second. I work with you very closely on TalkSport, and you're one of my favorite pundits to work with. Jim Crowley is also one of my favorite jockeys. I'm almost too much of a fanboy of Jim Crowley, quite frankly, but he's brilliant. And he's not here. He didn't say this on the show. I don't have the WhatsApp message to be able to prove it, because I speak regularly to a number of high-profile jockeys. One of the best jockeys in the UK told me recently he has been silenced, essentially. Not by his sponsors. He's been told to stop talking about what he sees as the problems in British racing. That really? He's causing too much problems.
Well, that's the opposite of what should be happening. I think, of course, you just need to sit down around the table and let's discuss these things. And look, I'm not claiming to have all the answers, and I'm guessing you're the same. But to just look the other way and pretend it's not happening, it's just going to drive people away from the sport. I think that's. I'm going back to Jim Crowley. I fully believe he's looked into this himself and looked at these new style of pro cushers and stuff, and he tried to get in touch with the BHA. I think that's all driven because of when he rode Hookham in the King George, and he said to me he was very close to giving one more tap, and it frightened the life out of him. Imagine losing at King George, a big Group 1 race, because of that. So
it was at this point the BHA hacked into the system and took out Martin Dwyer, cut the legs out from under him, stopped that guy from talking.
I don't know what happened there. It just went blank.
I think the only way out of this, Martin, is for the jockeys to go on strike.
Yeah, well, do you know, I don't know. But it's a problem. It's a massive problem. 10 years of suspensions is ridiculous. Horses getting thrown out a few days after. It's not working, clearly. So the BHA needs to get round the table with jockeys and other people. And like you say, stop pandering to people you're never going to change the minds of. Stop driving people away from the sport. They need to sit down and have a look at these rules and maybe admit to themselves they've got it wrong, because it's clearly not working. It's not right for the sport. It's not. So they need to look at it and just hiding behind, like you say, buzzwords and, coming out with statements. 60% of the jockeys are fine with it. Like you say, but 40% aren't.
There's well over 1,000 jockeys riding in the UK. Like, that's not a flex to be saying that, particularly when 98% of jockeys had completely adhered to the guidelines previously. The previous set of rules were working perfectly. There was no problem with them at all.
Yeah.
And again, if you and I say the BHA are pandering, they get on their high horse and they go, "How dare you?" And gaslight and say that that's not the case. I think this is really, really damaging to the sport. And I do genuinely think the jockeys are going to have to go on strike. I know they've talked about it. I know there have been conversations. And I know that there's a concern that if they do it, that the perception will be jockeys strike for the right to strike horses. This is where the BHA and the jockeys themselves need to be able to go on the front foot. And to be fair, I think Oisin and a number of jockeys, William Buick, have been great on this. They have explained what the pro-cush is and that it's not a welfare issue. You've just been very eloquent in that as well. But the BHA need to do the same thing. Stop pandering to people who don't care about the sport, who are actively working against you. Start fighting for the people who care about this sport. There's far more people who love racing. There's more people who are indifferent to racing. They don't care. It doesn't matter to them. But there's far more people who love it than who hate it. But the people who love it are being tested to the point that attendances at Cheltenham are falling off a cliff. Viewing figures are declining. Betting turnover is declining. Attendances are declining. This is something that can only be fixed if the sport is run properly. And by the way, Irish racing's in complete turmoil as well. So I really think they have to go on strike. I really do. This isn't going to... This is not going to... It's very clear the BHA have no intention, and unless Lydia Hislop becomes the CEO of the BHA, which I don't think that they would want somebody as strong as Lydia Hislop leading the sport, who would actually be in there doing what's right for the sport and right for the punter. Heaven forbid we'd have somebody who's out there fighting for the sport properly in charge. I don't see a way forward. I really don't. Should we try and lighten the mood very briefly and talk about Champions Day?
Yeah.
The Final Furlong podcast is proudly brought to you by Jeff Banks Bet, where tradition meets cutting-edge technology, and with major flat racing festivals on the horizon and the new jump season about to kick off properly, it's time to leave behind the corporate bookmakers who don't value your loyalty. At this point, you've got to be fed up of their restrictions, endless affordability checks, and losing out on incentives just because you dare to win a bet. Jeff is the bookmaker fighting for your right to bet, giving you the freedom to enjoy British and Irish racing the way it should be, and you can watch all that racing on the Jeff Banks Bet app. So say goodbye to bookies who want you to lose your hard-earned money on their online casinos, and say yes to unbeatable odds and a bookmaker that truly values your custom, Jeff Banks Bet. Final Furlong podcast listeners who sign up to Jeff Banks Online using the promo code FFP500 can get 10% of any net losses returned as cash after your first month of betting, up to £500. It's an offer you won't see anywhere else. Visit jeffbanks.bet today and enter promo code FFP500 and join the excitement. That's jeffbanks.bet using promo code FFP500, because your betting experience deserves more. I thought it was a great day. Bizarre champion stakes. Well done to Jim Crowley. It was an incredible ride. But the star of this day for me was the horse who didn't win a Group 1. He won a Group 2. 7 out of 7 for Kyprios. He's an absolute machine.
He's unbelievable, isn't he? To keep going, I mean, he's unbeaten in 7 now, his last 7 runs. And he's been busy as well. I mean, I was interested. I thought it was a really interesting matchup. Reading John Gosden's comments, they missed Goodwood with their horse Trawlerman. I think they wanted to bring him fresh and hoping that Kyprios would be a bit jaded after having a long season. I think that's what I'm only guessing, but leading up to the race, my feeling was they thought that was the only way they could beat Kyprios, and they still couldn't beat him. He's just the best stayer, isn't he? In the staying division, he's by far better than the rest. And it was a great bit of team riding as well. The two Aidan O'Brien horses, Kyprios went so steady that a lot of the horses behind them were keen. And when you ride in those staying races, if horses are pulling, especially on very soft ground, you're just wasting energy. So the team tactics really paid off for them. And the two horses that finished first and second, the horses that race behind the bridle, they're almost a bit lazy. I mean, Sweet William, he was having to be pushed along at the start by Robert Havlin, and he never picks up the bridle. So they're the type of horses, it suits them when they go steady. And Kyprios has just got such a great turn of foot for a stayer. He's just so much better than the rest. It was a really dominant display, wasn't it? Where does he rank in the stayers for you in the best in recent years? I mean, I think he's just behind Yates. Yeah, he's up there, isn't he? You could, after that performance, you could say he's as good as Yates, maybe. He's got such a good turn of foot. I suppose Stradivarius was similar when he was at his peak, but I'm not sure Stradivarius lasted as long. I might be wrong on that, but Kyprios seems to be going now for a good few years. I know last year he missed a bit of He had a bit of time off, didn't he, with a foot
He
injury?
nearly died.
Yeah, I mean, to come back as good as he is, amazing training performance, you have to say.
It's incredible. Aidan was saying on Racing TV afterwards to Mike Cattermole, interestingly, because it was a Sky or TV co-production, that he couldn't walk properly. And that they were just saving him for stud duties, and eventually he's come back to being the monster he is. I think it's incredible training from Aidan O'Brien. Stradivarius was a great stayer. He failed in his attempt to win 3 Gold Cups. I really hope Kyprios does it. And if he does do it, it'd be pretty amazing if they were to keep him going. And for those watching on YouTube, try and emulate what Yates did and win a 4th. But that might be asking a bit too much, but we'll see. Delighted for James Franchot to win a Group 1 this season. He's one of my favourite trainers. But to be able to go and win the British Champion Sprint with Deacon Blues and the Tin Man brothers, and then produce another horse who's out of a sister to them to go and win the race is just extraordinary.
Yeah, it's again great training. He's brought this horse along steadily, and as you say, he knows the family well, and James knows how to win this race. And I'm actually really pleased to see a good 3-year-old come through in the sprinting division, because I've thought through this season anyway, maybe the last few seasons, we haven't seen any real standout sprinters. I thought maybe Big Ev's the start of this year would be one that would really kick on, and he's been brilliant at times, but it seems like every Group 1 sprint that's run is a different winner each time, and they're all taking a turn beating each other. But this lad, Kind of Blue, might just be a real star for the next couple of seasons.
Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. I'd need to see him win another one. I'm sure he will. He's very talented. But the sprint division is just a complete mess, and it's a total mess in Ireland. We have nothing of any significance in the sprint division. Absolutely nothing in Ireland that you can hang your hat on and go, well, this is our boy who's going to... We've nothing here. It's crazy, and it's just such a roulette wheel of horses. But hopefully Brad Sell and him can kick on next season, maybe believing maybe the roll of the dice will go her way eventually. It's just a mess of a division. Blue Stocking was beaten in the Fillies and Mares sprint last year. She emerges as a 4-year-old to become the best middle distance mare in training and the ARC winner. Can Kalpana for the owners following her hoof prints?
Yeah, it'd be interesting. They'll probably try and avoid each other early on, but there'll come a point where they'll have to take each other on. And I have to say, I didn't see Kalpana winning that on Saturday. I didn't think she'd handle the ground. And
neither did I.
She proved me wrong and everyone else, and she's just got stronger and stronger through this season. What a really nice mare, and so uncomplicated as well.
Yeah, she's a cracking mare. You would like to think she will emerge even better than Blue Stocking was, and that's going to be a real threat to everybody. But I think the fact that she was so strong in the betting, she was a red-hot favourite for the Ribblesdale, didn't quite work out for her. She was so strong in the betting at Hamilton. The market move for her at Kempton, that's where it was telling you this is really a Group 1 horse running in a Group 3. Like 3-1 in the morning, sent off nearly even money against proper group performers for the all-weather. Very, very interesting stuff, and a very exciting horse for next season. The QE2, I don't know what to make of Henry Longfellow. Not a horse I'd give up on, by the way, but yeah, that didn't quite work out. But Sharon has just been extraordinary this season. There's a pretty reasonable argument to be made that he should be unbeaten all season. He was very unlucky with the way the lockage panned out. Same in France the other day, but he was really brave. I was full sure Factor Cheval had him, but he was able to pull out more.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably the top miler in Europe, isn't he? And like you say, there's probably a couple of races have just got away from him. Certainly the last run in France, the winner had just kicked on the front end and got, I thought Sylvester, that day, he always rides in prominence and aggressively, and that day he just switched off and underestimated the horse in front, and he made up for it yesterday. Such a good horse, good battling qualities. He reminds me a little bit of Giant's Causeway, the Iron Horse. Sharon, he wears his heart on his sleeve the way he races, and yeah, it was a brilliant performance. I think that's probably the last we're going to see of him, unfortunately, though, isn't it?
Yeah, there was talk of him going to Asia, which I'm not sure if that's... Oh, okay. I'm not sure if they'll do it now, because he's had a hard season. But maybe, but it is the last time we'll see him in Britain for sure. And look, good luck to him. If you had told me at the start of the season Sharon's going to win 3 Group 1s, I'd have thought you were completely daft. I'm very pleased for Roger Varian as well. An important win for him. Brilliant training.
To keep a horse going all season like he has with him. He started in March. He won at Doncaster the first meeting.
Yeah. And I'm still not happy about how Kia Jabrakan handled things. You can be annoyed about a horse getting injured, but don't blame a trainer for it. It's really outrageous. Outrageous scenes in the Champion Stakes. I don't know how I keep expecting on the replay, Clandagan's going to get it. Fair play to Peter Michael. He said that it was going to be a complete nightmare and it would be peas and carrots all over the place for those of us who backed Clandagan. That's exactly what happened. I don't really blame the jockey. I think there wasn't really a whole lot he could do about it the way it panned out. But I still don't fully understand how Jim Crowley gets there on Amnat.
No, I mean, it eventually opened up for him. Jim would have been very unlucky. I previewed the race the day before on Racing TV. I had Clandagan down as winning it, but I said the only way he might get beat is if stall 1 ends up being a coffin draw. He gets stuck on it inside. Of course, they raced on the hurdles track, which is quite a bit tighter than the outside track, and sometimes in a big field, you get stuck on it inside. He might not get a run, but I actually thought Clandagan, it opened up well enough if he was good enough. He just got caught late on by Anmat. And yeah, again, another great training performance. Owen Burrows done brilliantly with this horse. He missed most of last year, didn't he? Anmat, He won early on in France, the Group 1 in France, and then missed a lot of time. And he's brought this horse back, and he come back with a bang yesterday, that's for sure. You could see Jim crossing the line, how happy he was. He nearly fell off celebrating, didn't he?
I mean, it was a brilliant ride. It obviously meant a lot to him. Well done to him. Well done to Owen Burrows. I really like Owen. I think he's a fantastic trainer. That's not a satisfactory race. It just isn't. It's the Champion Stakes, Martin. The Irish Champion Stakes goes to Economics, beats Auguste Rodin. The Eclipse and the Juddmonte go to City of Troy. Auguste Rodin wins the Prince of Wales. White Birch wins the Tattersalls Gold Cup. If you backed Anmat to win the Champion Stakes, well done. But do you really think that's a horse who's going to be winning a Juddmonte or an Irish Champion Stakes next year? No, of course not. But well done to his connections. What about Economics? I'm really not satisfied. I don't think this is satisfactory at all. We could see there was blood on his nostrils after the Dante. There was somebody on ITV saying, he might have banged his head in the stalls. And we were being told, no, he didn't bleed. No, he didn't bleed. And the whole thing was, why has he missed the Derby, the French Derby, the Irish Derby, the King George, the Juddmonte International? He's back in Deauville, wins the Irish Champion Stakes, but doesn't go to the Arc. Finally turns up for the Champion Stakes. Now, if he wins that race, I think then you don't criticize him for missing all the others. But if we had known he had burst a blood vessel in the Dante, that would have been the talking point going into the race. Yes, he's brilliant. He was great in the Irish Champion Stakes. If he stays sound, he's going to have a great chance of winning. But proceed with caution. He's burst before. This is the strong second favourite for the Champion Stakes. We should have known that.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, isn't it? I'm not sure. So surely the vet would have looked at him at York. So would that not be publicised in the report, the race report afterwards? Everything is reported. That you look at any results and there'll be something in there. Jockey finished 10th and reported the horse stumbled but the vets would normally check a horse who looks to have bled. I mean, I have to be honest, I'd actually forgotten that was a thing at York. I heard it said he banged his nose in the stall, so I just presumed that was what happened. So I've no idea whether it did or it didn't, but I'm just, wondering whether the vet looked at him. And normally if a horse is bled on the day, he will be scoped to see how serious it is and whatnot. So yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I didn't fancy his chances, I have to say.
Neither did I.
I thought, I made the case the day before, I thought Clandagan had looked to be a better horse the way he finished out at York. And I just thought Economics had a really tough race to win the Champion Stakes at Leopardstown. He travelled wide. It was a brilliant ride from Tom, but I just thought that might have left a mark on him coming into Ascot. So I didn't fancy him for that reason. And he was unproven on that very heavy ground. So I didn't really fancy him. But yeah, it's such a shame that he's obviously bled and it's something that is a worry going forward. But yeah, in answer to your question, if he did bleed, York and it was known, then, you know, punters probably deserve to have known that, or it should be out there as a fact. But that can only happen if the vet on the day checked him over and reported it back to the stewards.
Well, Andy, Peter and I recorded the weekend preview on the Thursday afternoon, and I was driving to Dublin that night because I was in a studio on Friday morning, and I listened to a lot of the racing podcasts that were previewing the weekend racing. And then Friday night I was listening to the great In the Know show with Tom Siegel. I didn't hear anybody. I listened to Ross and Jess and Tom on the SBK show. I didn't hear anybody mention that there's a risk that economics could bleed, because once you've burst before, there's a serious risk you'll do it again. None of us knew about it. It wasn't being talked about.
No.
And it's our role in the media to be able to report this stuff. But if you're actively being told, oh, no, I don't know what we're supposed to do, but it's not satisfactory at all. What was your highlight of Champions Day?
Do you know, that's a good pub. It's hard to really. I thought every race was brilliant. I thought Kyprios was, the way the race was run, the way they rode and slowed down the pace. I thought that was really tactically really astute ride from both horses, both the Ballydoyle horses. But he's the best. Kyprios was brilliant. Kalpana proved me wrong. She was outstanding. Sharon, brilliant performance. Such a tough horse. Yeah. And yeah, I thought the big race itself, although it wasn't ideal, it was messy and it was horses getting boxed in and it was a rough race. But that's, you know, part of racing, isn't it? That's part of the top races, small margins. But I do think the best horse won. I thought Anmat was the best horse on the day.
I agree. I very much agree. I thought Kalpana was great and she's so exciting for next season, but Kyprios was the star of the show. What a horse. Yeah. An incredible story. Martin, really appreciate your company on the Final Furlong podcast as always. When are you back on Racing TV?
I'm working Wednesday and then I'm working Friday. And then I'm doing the Breeders' Cup the following week, so I'm looking forward to that. I'll have to start watching plenty of replays and get my head around those races.
Have you had much of a look yet?
I haven't started yet. I'll start this week, slowly do a bit each day, watch races back, and hopefully some of it sinks into the old grey matter.
Well, we've got a couple of specials coming up. We're going to do a crossover podcast with one of the top American racing podcasts this week, which I'm very much looking forward to getting their insight into it, because I'm fascinated by City of Troy. But I was talking to Barry Faulkner about this, the Don, and Barry was making the point that, yeah, he can do it, but the damn side of the pedigree is all turf. And I would worry about that for City of Troy. Now, the form is obviously electric, and I think he is the best horse in the race, but is he going to like the surface? And
well, this is the thing. I'm always a firm believer in the surface. It's not the surface. Most horses gallop on sand, tapeta, turf. When you look at horses' form, they are either better on one or the other, and it's because of the style of how they race. You know, years gone by, if I've ridden a mile and a quarter horse, but he's slow out the gates and slow to warm up and gets going and finishes races off strongly, then that's suited to the turf. But you try and ride a horse like that in a good race on the all-weather surfaces, it's impossible, because you can't get a good early position and you're getting sand kicked in your face the whole way around. So, you know, they can't perform that well. So it's not about the actual surface underfoot for me. It's about the style of racing.
I agree. It also is just very possible that he's making up so much of the market. He's taking such a big chunk of it. If he doesn't handle it, well, then he can't win, and something else will. And if you can work out who that horse is, you're going to be very well rewarded for that. So as much as I love City of Troy, and I'm a huge fan of his, I hope we'll get to talk to Aidan about him on the show in the next few days.
A lot will depend on his draw.
Yes. Yeah.
If he gets a wide, you know, he might be better off with a wide draw if he's not going to be as quick into stride and get, you know, he might be, you know, I don't know if you go back to Mishrif when he won in Saudi on that dirt track. He was drawn wide, and it was perfect for him because he was slow into stride. He had to be chased along for a furlong, but because he was drawn wide, he didn't have the whole field in front of him getting sand in his face. He stayed wide. He was good enough to travel wide and deep and then come across when they got to the first bend and sit in a handy position. Where if you're drawn low, you don't get that opportunity. You just end up getting stuck on the rail, getting sand in your face. So a lot will depend on his draw, I think, City of Troy.
Does he need to make the running to win it, do you think?
Don't think he necessarily needs to make the run. He just needs to get a good early position. It's a tight track. It's just about the best position you can get. And, you know, he can sit in second, third. Once he's in a rhythm and he's in a good position, then, you know, he's probably the best. He's probably going to be the best horse in the race. So it just depends. It's all down to what early position he gets.
The thing I find fascinating about it is the futures markets over there and the Vegas betting and the morning line that's currently built. City of Troy is favourite. So it's not just that he's a strong favourite here, it's that he's a strong favourite there as well. So they obviously don't really rate their horses that much. They're good enough to win one, obviously. But he's the horse who has the X factor. If he handles the surface, then he will win. But if he doesn't, there's the potential opportunity for us to make big money if we can work out who the right horse is. Betting available now on Jeff Banks' Bet, by the way. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting stuck into all that. I'll be watching you on Breeders' Cup night. So the racing TV coverage is great.
I'll be tuning in to listen to your podcast this week then and see what I can pick up from you.
Thank you. It won't be me. It'll be the top American guys. I'm looking forward to getting their insight. The HHH podcast, we're looking forward to teaming up with them. And we've got a panel of experts next week to do our annual Breeders' Cup show. Some of the usual suspects. I really hope you'll enjoy that too. From Martin Dwyer and me, Emmet Kennedy, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching this episode of the Final Furlong podcast. If you liked it, check out the YouTube channel. Likes on YouTube are much appreciated. Likes and shares. Share this with everybody on WhatsApp. Just carpet bomb this episode to everybody on WhatsApp. I think it's an important conversation to have. British racing's in turmoil, and it's not the fault of the jockeys, but they're the ones who are being blamed for it, and that needs to stop. From Martin and from me, thank you. Look after yourself and each other. God bless. This is a paid advertisement from BetterHelp Therapy Online. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or therapy day. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you've no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. If you've ever been in therapy, then like me, you know how beneficial it can be. But it's not just for those who've experienced major trauma. It's helpful for learning positive coping skills and setting boundaries. Therapy empowers you to be the best version of yourself. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a registered therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. With almost 5,000 therapists in the UK already, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a wide variety of expertise. Visit betterhelp.com/furlong today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/furlong. This is a paid advertisement by BetterHelp. Give online therapy a try at betterhelp.com/furlong to get 10% off your first month and get on your way to being your best self.
The Final Furlong podcast is proudly brought to you by Jeff Banks Bet. Get up to £500 refunded as real money for new Jeff Banks online accounts after your first month of betting. Use promo code FFP500 at jeffbanks.bet and buy BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Our listeners get 10% off your first month. So give online therapy a try at betterhelp.com/FURLONG.